Hello, this is me, Dr. Preeti Purve. This is another session. This one is on neurodynamics. The topic, if you know very well, it is really very interesting to solve. A little tricky in the start, but the more you do it, the more expert you will be at interpreting the neurodynamic studies. It really becomes interesting as you start to get the right answers and slowly you master this. Take it from me, this is not a very difficult topic. Let's see if I can help you in today's session. So the definition as per the TOG article that was recently published is it is urodynamic observations which are made during a variety of investigations to objectively assess the function or dysfunction of the lower urinary tract. So we are just assessing how the bladder works, how the urethra works, right? They should only ever be performed either taking a comprehensive history. So these are basically the prerequisites. So you should be taking the history, you should be answering all the important questions that are asked by the patients before taking up the patient for urodynamic studies. You should also do the examination of the patient, the clinical examination, see whether the patient has completed the bladder diary and ask how much the patient's quality of life is getting affected because of the problem she is facing. So going ahead, the uses of urodynamic. The urodynamic observations are performed to confirm or refute a diagnosis and identify all factors contributing to the causes of LUTS, that is lower urinary tract symptoms. They can help to ensure the correct management is pursued, particularly if prior conservative or surgical treatments have failed. So that's one thing. Another thing is they can also capture the information that may not be present as the symptoms in the patient, such as concurrent detrusor overactivity or voiding dysfunction, which may aid the surgeon in appropriate preoperative counseling and guide the patient's expectations. Another one, in turn, this may preempt the potential postoperative outcomes such as the development of urinary urgency and the voiding dysfunction. They may also play important role in surveillance or the research programs. Basically, how the treatment works, whether it is really working very well and all. So this is all where the urodynamics is important and useful in patients who have got lower urinary tract infections. Now, but the consent, of course, nothing can be done without consent. And now this has become a very important part of clinical practice everywhere. Specifically here in urodynamics, the patient has to really go through an embarrassing situation where she has to pee in front of, though it is a private room, but it feels awkward there. And that is why the patient should be made comfortable beforehand and she should be given a written information about what will happen in the clinic so that she makes up her mind when she comes for the urodynamic testing. Again, remember about the preparation things. These are very, very important things from the TOG articles. Though this is really a practical session on how to do the interpretation of the urodynamic studies, I really wanted you to go through this, and these should not be missed. Prior to commencing, the urine dipstick must be checked for infection or hematuria, so do not forget to do a urine dipstick. If there is evidence of urinary tract infection, then the test should be postponed until the infection is treated. There is a risk of UTI when undergoing the urodynamic observations because we are going to put the foreign things inside the transducers. The potential benefits of routine prophylactic antibiotics do not outweigh the potential clinical and financial implications and are therefore not routinely prescribed. So the antibiotics are not routinely prescribed. Aseptic conditions, of course, needs to be maintained when performing all the types of invasive components of urodynamic observations. If there is any evidence of prolapse, then this should be reduced using a pessary, speculum, or finger. So remember, even the prolapse needs to be reduced. Now, there are three components of the urodynamic testing. It's the uroflowmetry, then the cystometry, and the pressure profilometry. There are different types of cystometries. Again, that is the one that we will be doing. Again, there can be the video cystometries, there can be ambulatory urodynamics, which we are dealing with what will be asked most of the times, and, and the other ones are not included in the session. Now, but the uroflowmetry, what happens in the uroflowmetry? So as soon as the patient comes to the clinic, what is uroflowmetry? It is a simple, non-invasive and relatively inexpensive test. It allows the objective and quantitative information to be gathered as a first-line screening test. Patient is asked to void, okay, by relaxing and not straining while sitting on a commode over the rotating disc flowmeter or the weight transducer flowmeter. So remember that the patient has to come with full bladder before doing the uroflowmetry because the patient only has to void in uroflowmetry. So that is considered to be the first thing to be done in any urodynamic testing generally. Patient has to sit on a commode and the patient has to not strain, okay? The patient just has to void. The volume of the urine passed per unit time caused by assess can be assessed in the millimeters per second. So that is actually the speed and the volume that we measure in this uroflowmetry. So the volume per unit, the volume of the urine passed per unit can be assessed in milliliters per second, giving a maximum flow rate and volume voided that can be displayed graphically. The PVR urine volume measurement can then be done sonographically or with a catheter. PVR is the post-void residual volume. So after this is done, we can just check the post-void residual volume by doing a scan or catheterization. We have seen that a bladder scan is always better. This is the remaining intravesical fluid volume after completed voiding that is remaining inside. So it will give an idea about how the bladder is functioning. The International Continence Society that should be reported as a minimum of the uroflowmetry, and we have seen with the patient in their preferred position whatever they feel like, so they can either use a standing or a sitting position and ensuring that the patient had a representative. They should be telling us is the speed of the urine, the volume of the urine, and the residual volume. Now this is what we generally see. So this is the graph of the uroflowmetry. Remember, it's a bell-shaped curve. We see the voided volume, we see the maximum flow rate, the average flow rate, the flow time. Flow time is generally 15 to 30 seconds, and time to maximum flow. Now this uroflowmetry is a normal flow. The normal flow is seen as a bell-shaped curve with a rapid stroke and the curve with continuous flow. Okay, a clear maximum flow is called as Qmax and a quick decline to end clearly. Now remember, this bell that was shown or is rarely seen, and it is rarely symmetrical. It generally is has got a little hesitations and doesn't look as smooth as it looks in the diagram though, but it should look like a bell and it should look symmetrical. Now this is taken from the TOG article, and they have said that the normal Qmax can be considered from 20 to 36 ml per second. Okay. A PVR, that is the post-void residual volume of less than 100 ml, is not regarded as clinically significant in asymptomatic patients. So we may take up 100 ml also as normal in asymptomatic patients. A high PVR may be secondary to detrusor underactivity caused by anticholinergic medications, detrusor failure, or bladder outlet obstructions. Now, this is generally the bell-shaped curve that is shown, a representation of a normal uroflowmetry. The Qmax has to be more than 15 ml per second. Most of the times, this is taken from the RCOG site, and this one tells us about the Qmax, though from 20 onwards, we consider it normal for a large number of population. Now, this is another uroflowmetry. Now, if you see, it has got a flattened pattern, which of course tells you that something is not good. And there is a flow in the start, but it's not reaching the maximum height. And we can see that at the end, there seems to be some problem there with the voiding. This one is more about the obstruction, right? So this looks more like the obstruction in the urethra. It can be because of anything. It looks like an outlet obstruction. Now this one is the interrupted pattern or a straining pattern. Here there seems to be some problem with the bladder contractility. There seems to be some obstruction in the outlet. Also, there can be some voiding problems, like the patient is straining or getting hesitated, and maybe that is why this pattern in the uroflowmetry that has come up. Another one is the box pattern. This is very common with the urethral stricture, where the urine flow is, see, uh, it is not a very big curve. It is a smooth flattened type of curve again, and it is mainly because of the continuous problems with the passage of the urine, and that is why the urine is flowing, but because the urethra is having a stricture, the urine cannot be it is not flowing at the maximum speed, but it is giving us a flattened curve in the uroflowmetry. Now this one again shows an obstruction, and we need to find out, whenever we get such abnormal uroflowmetries, whether it is because of the hypocontractile bladder, that means there is any problem with the bladder, or there is any problem with the outlet. So here if you look, In this figure, it shows an abnormal flow pattern where, although the flow is continuous, it is prolonged and the Qmax is reduced. This may be due to the obstruction or hypocontractile bladder. So we cannot say right now. So the obstruction could be because of the urethral kinking or because of the cystocele, right? It is not possible to differentiate the two without simultaneous detrusor pressures. So the detrusor pressures you will get only from the cystometry, which we'll be seeing in some time. The high detrusor pressure during voiding indicate obstruction. Low detrusor pressures are due to hypocontractile bladder. So there is a formula which can help you to know whether the bladder is having a problem or it's the outlet problem. So generally remember that if there is a low flow rate, if there is a low P detrusor, that is pressure of the detrusors are low, and there is a normal urethral pressure, that means the pressure profilometry is showing that the urethral pressure is normal, then it is a hypocontractile bladder. Okay. Whereas if the flow rate is low, but the pressures of the detrusor we have just seen, if it is high, and the urethral pressure is also high, that means the urethral sphincter is working properly. That means there is a problem with the outflow and it is an obstruction. Okay. Here, the flow pattern is also abnormal. There is intermittent urine stream. It starts and stops, and this may be due to obstruction and hypocontractile bladder. Anything abnormal flow pattern indicate voiding difficulty, which increases the risk of retention after the continence surgery. So remember about the high detrusor pressures and the low detrusor pressures. Generally, the high detrusor pressures means there is an obstruction down there while voiding, whereas the low detrusor pressure means the pressure, it may be a hypocontractile bladder. Now coming to the cystometry. Cystometry is a test to assess the bladder's function and how it works while filling and while voiding. So while filling, while it stores, and while it voids. It involves artificially and continuously filling of the bladder with the fluid via a single lumen or a double lumen catheter to measure the pressure within the bladder or the intravesical pressure. Normal pressures is around 5 to 50 centimeters of H2O. The rectal placement of the fluid-filled open or punctured balloon catheter is used to measure the pressure surrounding the bladder or the abdominal pressure. So remember, there are three catheters that are kept. One is kept in the rectum to check the abdominal pressure. Two are kept in the bladder. One is to give the is to fill the bladder with the fluid. Another one is a transducer, and it will check the pressures of the bladder. So this is how it is. Now the initial resting pressures of the P vest, that is the pressures of the bladder, and the P abdomen are recorded at the beginning of the cystometry. So first record what is the resting pressure. Then you have to fill this bladder now at the rate of 10 at the rate of ml per minute of 10% of the maximum voided volume. So whatever is the volume that has been voided during the uroflowmetry, so 10% of it at the rate of that. Generally, it is 1 to 2 ml per minute. In the physiological filling, the patients with detrusor overactivity may need a slower of 10 ml per minute. So generally it is, when we do in a urodynamic testing, it is 10 ml per minute, whereas physiologically it is around 1 to 2 ml per minute. That is the rate of filling of the bladder. What are we going to look here in cystometry? We'll be seeing the first sensation of bladder filling, we'll be seeing the first desire when the patient feels like going to the toilet, and the last one is the strong desire to void. And then we'll see when the patient voids the urine, how the pressures will change. Now, during the bladder filling, the patient is asked to cough every minute to assess the recording quality, right? The provocation maneuvers can again be used, and they are hill bouncing, jogging, running water, listening to the running water, or uh, washing hands, like that. Okay. Now, these are the different phases of the cystogram that we were seeing. And the first and the second phase involves the storage capability, whereas the third and the fourth gives an idea about how the bladder reacts when the patient is asked to void. This is an important thing to remember. The pressure of the detrusor is equal to the pressure of the bladder minus the pressure of the abdomen. Now, it's easy to remember when you are reading it, but you forget it within 24 hours. So that actually used to happen with me. And that is why I made a formula. There are different formulas that different people tell. Mine is, I think that the bladder pressure is actually the pressure of the abdomen plus the pressure of the detrusor, right? So I go with the formula of BAD, which means B is equal to A plus D. So B stands for bladder, A stands for abdomen, and D stands for detrusor. So there is no confusion. And then whenever I want to see they ask about the detrusor pressure, of course, the thing I do is A will go on the left hand side, of course, and then it will be bladder minus the abdominal pressure. If you want to find out what is the pressure of abdomen, then it is the pressure of the bladder minus the pressure of the detrusor, right? So it goes like that. See if you can remember. This is a better option than the other things, because I think BAD is quite an easy way of remembering it, the word that we use in our daily lives, and we can easily remember that. Now, coming to something that we always are a little afraid of, and we think that it's difficult. Remember, this is a normal curve. They will give you the three different lines. We have seen that it will give us the P detrusor, the P abdomen, the P, the pressure of the bladder. Now, the three things that are mentioned, see the color coding is not the same for all the labs. So do not give any color coding to anything. Always check what they have written at the end of the graph. So the blue one here is the bladder, the red one is the abdomen, and the green one is the detrusor. Whereas, see how the things are changing when the patient is asked to cough. See above on the chart, the patient is told to cough. There are different maneuvers that the patient is undergoing, and this is when they check. So the first sensation for this patient is at 172 ml. The capacity of the bladder for this patient is 519, where the patient has the strongest desire to void, and then the patient is asked to void. Okay. Again, this is a normal cystometry, and check again here that there is no change in the pressures of the detrusor. There's no change in the pressure of the bladder and the abdomen. Everything is changing accordingly. There's no sudden increase or decrease in any of the graphs. And with the voiding, of course, the pressures should rise. So during the voiding, the bladder pressure and the abdominal pressure is going to rise. Again, the P detrusor that will be seeing that there is a pressure of the P detrusor that should be less than 70 while voiding, and it should be less than 15 while filling. Now this chart is the best chart you'll ever see, and this gives us an idea of what happens when. So in a normal bladder, whenever you cuff, you will see that there is a spike that you'll see in the abdomen, in the abdominal catheter, um, that pressure that will go up. There will be a spike again in the bladder catheter too. Okay, whenever the patient is asked to undergo Valsalva maneuver, again there will be a rise in the abdominal pressure as well as the bladder pressure, right? But there will be no change in the detrusor pressure. Whereas whenever you see a detrusor overactivity patient, there will be always a rise in the detrusor pressure during the filling time, whereas during the filling there should not be any rise in the detrusor pressure as such, or there shouldn't be any spike in that. So whenever in the detrusor overactivity patient, we'll see that the spike is there in the detrusor as well as in the bladder pressures. Okay, but the abdominal pressure is not rising. In the urodynamic stress incontinence patient, you'll see that when the patient coughs, there is a rise in the bladder pressure and there is a leak. So see, there are two types. One is dry urinary problems and one is the wet incontinence. Wet incontinence, that means the patient leaks when the patient has problems. So during the coughing, if the patient leaks, that means the patient has got stress, urodynamic stress incontinence. When the patient has got detrusor overactivity, the patient may not leak also. Okay, so remember there can be, it may be called, when the patient is leaking when having a detrusor overactivity, it may be called as wet detrusor overactivity or wet overactive bladder. And the last one is a normal voiding cystogram, wherein you will find that there is no change in the abdominal pressure. Otherwise, there is an increase in during the voiding. There is an increase in the bladder pressure, of course, because patient is voiding, and there is an increase in the detrusor pressure during the voiding. So during the voiding, there has to be an increase in the normal detrusor pressure, and we have seen that it should be less than 70, and the flow rate of course the uroflowmetry will be checking this, and we have seen that whenever the patient voids, what we do is called as uroflowmetry, and it will show almost the same curve if it is normal while doing the cystometry also. This is diagram, and this graph gives us an idea of the detrusor overactivity. See here, you cannot check. So the first line, the third is about the detrusor pressure, and pressures are rising along with the leak, along with the overactive. It is not a reducer overactivity, and then you may look at the different types of the stress urinary incontinence that the patient is having. Okay. Now, the different types of stress urinary incontinence, I mean, there are two causes there. One is because of the urethral sphincter defect. Now, this is a urodynamic stress incontinence. See here, in the stress incontinence, whenever there is an increase in the pressure of the abdomen, there is increase in the pressure of the bladder, and this generally can happen, but it doesn't cause a leak in the urine. And whenever there is a leak, then we call it as a stress urinary incontinence. Whenever it occurs because of the cuffing in the clinic, and we do it for the sake of urodynamic testing, when it happens while doing the testing, we call it urodynamic stress incontinence. Okay. This again is here the patient is asked to cuff, and with the cuff there was a leak. Though it can be seen that there is a little increase in the detrusor, but remember that small spikes can be the artifacts, and you have to see that the spike is not as big as that of seeing why, like the changes in the bladder and the abdominal pressures. So this is a stress incontinence. Now here you will see that there is the first one is the bladder pressure, second is abdominal, and third is the detrusor. And the bladder is showing shaky rise in the increase, shaky vibrations there in the pressures for the bladder. And this is nothing but it's an artifact. There can be some wobbles that you may be seeing. It may be because of the human errors or because the transducers are not there in the place. So always check that first. There are very good charts given in the talks which you should be looking after, and this talk it gives you and it tells you about what different type of flow. Okay. Now this one is about the urethral pressure profilometry. The urethral pressure profile is a graph which indicates the intraluminal pressure along the length of the urethra. So it gives us an idea about how the urethra is working. The urethral pressure, here you'll be seeing the fluid pressure needed to just open a closed urethra. So that is the urethral pressure, and it can be obtained by withdrawing the pressure sensor catheter along the length of the catheter. And there you'll be seeing the urethral pressure. So what it is, we just see how much pressure is required to open the closed urethra. Now that generally is more than 25 mm of H2O. If the SUI, you can see that the patient is leaking on effort and the urethral pressure is more than 25 mm of H2O, it is hypermobility of urethra. Whereas when the urethral pressures are less than 25 mm of waters, then it is the urethral sphincter defect, right? So that means when the pressure required to open a closed urethra is less, of course it's a sphincter defect, and the leak is because of the problem with the sphincter muscle, right? So here in such problems with the sphincter muscle problems, the surgeries like colposuspension and increasing the support to the urethra is not going to solve our problem there, right? Now, these are some normal values that you should be remembering all the time. The bladder capacity is around 400 to 600 ml. The first sensations for the patients is generally at 150 to 200 ml. The filling detrusor pressures when the bladder is getting filled is around less than 15 centimeters of H2O, whenever the Qmax while voiding the urine, it should be more than 15 ml per second. We saw that that's the speed of the urine that should be passed, and the voiding detrusor pressure at that time of passing of urine should be less than 70 centimeters of H2O. And the last one is the residual volume. We have seen that though at 100 ml, it can be considered normal for the population. The normal values that we generally consider is it should not be no residue of more than 50 ml should be there. And generally, if it is less than 50 ml, we consider it as very, very normal. Remember, in bladder pain syndrome, the bladder capacity is reduced. So if they give you a diagram, that means a graph wherein you are finding that the bladder's capacity is reduced and the patient wants to void or has a strong desire to void uh, at a very less pressure or at a very less volume, sorry, say around 300, then it goes mostly in the favor of uh, the problems with the structural problems with the bladder, wherein the bladder's capacity is reduced either because of the fibrosis there or because of the bladder pain syndrome if the patient has got pain when the bladder gets fed. Okay, so yes, the bladder capacity is reduced in bladder pain syndrome, and that can again be one of the charts that can come. Remember about the sensory urgency, it is just the feeling of going to the or rushing to the washroom and the patient doesn't leak urine there. The constantly has a feeling of going to the toilet. That is a sensory urgency. So I hope that this session was useful for you. I know it looks difficult. The more you read the charts, the more you go through the interpretations, go on the internet and take some random charts and try to solve them. That's the only way of going ahead with it. Give at least half a day to just to interpret the charts, and you will be doing it. I know that first few charts will of course be wrong, but you will master it in some time. Keep on doing it at intervals. Say for example you have done it now, try to take one chart again at 15 days, after 15 days, and see whether you are still able to interpret. Remember some of the formulas that were told in this session. They are really important to remember. And this is me saying thank you. And believe me, I completely believe in the sentence that I have written. Believe and it will happen. I don't have any words to tell you why I am saying that, because I can only feel that whatever I believed in, whatever I want to achieve, I am almost going towards that. And I've seen that most of the big people who are very, very successful, and we call them successful, they give us the same thought, and somehow you'll realize that in this journey, you start believing in yourself and you become a very different person. So, guys, I hope this session was useful for you. It's me saying thank you. Thank you.